who's patient, and it's my job to make you a vegan expert. In this video, we're going to explore the world of grains. Grains are extremely nutritious and they deserve a spot in your regular menu planning for your vegan diet. There are thousands of varieties of grain, 21 different types, and many of them are available in your local grocery store. So it's worth a look-see because they are so nutritious and they are so good for you. So let's get started. There are many delicious grains that have been around for thousands of years. In fact, the Agrarian Era began about 10,000 years ago when people began cultivating grains, and this meant that they no longer had to follow food in order to survive. They learned how to harvest it and store it and feed their community year-round. So you would say that food security is at the hallmark of the Agrarian Era. Now we've industrialized grain production. We have big machines that create big bales of hay and wheat and take all the hard work out of growing grains. Prior to becoming vegan, your experience with grains may have been limited to all-purpose white flour. This flour is made when the wheat kernel has been refined. This means that the outer bran layer has been stripped of the beneficial fiber and nutrients. The remaining endosperm is then ground into flour, which has almost no flavor and no nutrition, but it makes baking very easy. You might say, wait a minute, I've eaten white bread and I know there's nutrition in there. Let me point out that the nutrition in white bread is there because it has been added back in. Let's take a look at this bag of all-purpose flour. Right underneath it, you see the word enriched. That means they've added synthetic vitamins back into the flour to give you some nutrition. And then next to it, it also says bleached, which means they want to give the flour a pleasant look. So they bleach it. Now, I don't know about you, but I will go ahead and eat brown bread. That's just fine. And I'd rather eat it that way anyway because I also know that the nutrition and fiber are still intact from the original wheat kernel. Breads made from white flour pale in comparison to the nutritional value of whole grain bread. White bread is what we would call, in the nutrition industry, an empty calorie. And it is in many different types of foods. So you need to take a step back and look at what you eat. Do we eat a lot of white bread, bagels, English muffins, pasta, chips, tacos, tortillas? All that has white flour in it. And it's just a waste of calories. And unfortunately, our bodies are designed so that when we're hungry, we only really feel satisfied when we're getting the nutrition we need. If you're loading up on empty calories like white flour, bread, pasta, that kind of thing, you're always going to be hungry because you're not really nourishing your body. So I really don't think that white flour should be in anybody's diet. In fact, I think the best use for white flour is for making glue. It makes a great glue. After all, that's how we make paper mache. Enough of that. Let's get on to the exciting world of whole grains. When we hear the word grain, we often associate it with whole wheat bread. So is eating whole wheat bread better than eating white bread? And isn't that a good way to get grains in your diet? No, because there's a distinction to be made between whole wheat and whole grain. Whole wheat is so misleading. It's like saying flour is enriched to make it sound nutritious. whole wheat makes it sound like you're getting the benefit of the whole grain, but you're not. Generally, whole wheat bread is not that nutritious for you, and you're not going to find a lot of nutrition from the breads you find in the bread aisle. You really, if you're going to eat bread, go to the bakery section and get something extremely nutritious, delicious. It's going to add variety and texture and flavor to your meals, and you're not going to regret it. There are so many different whole grain breads to try. And because grains are so high in fiber and nutrients, it's a really good choice for a growing teenager and a growing vegan. All this whole grain goodness can be used in breakfast oatmeal, a lunch salad, a midday snack, and dessert. Learning to use the many whole grains will add texture and flavor and variety to your vegan meals. Whole grains are very high in fiber. B vitamins, magnesium, zinc, selenium, iron, manganese, all these are needed for bone growth and energy production. Our discussion of grains will be divided into two camps: gluten-free grains and grains with gluten. Gluten-free foods have gotten a lot of attention in the last decade or so, but I find that it's not very well understood. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to explain all about gluten and why we need to think about it. So what is gluten? Gluten is a group of proteins present in certain grains. Not all grains, just certain grains. Gluten is what gives dough that elastic texture and quality. And if you want to make bread, you want a high gluten grain like wheat and rye. What is celiac disease? In some people, celiac disease is triggered by eating gluten-containing foods. For these people, eating gluten leads to damage in the small intestine. This painful condition impairs the body's ability to absorb vitamins and minerals and can lead to significant nutritional deficiencies if they don't figure out what's going on. We know that celiac disease is an autoimmune disorder, and it's present in 1% of the population. Here's a picture of a cross-section of the small intestine. You can see there are villi here. These are the finger-like projections that increase the surface area of the small intestine. And that's important because when food passes through, there are more opportunities to extract the nutrition from your food. Unfortunately, if you do have celiac disease, the villi, unfortunately, are damaged, and it reduces the surface area, and that's why they don't have very good nutrition and may suffer from nutritional deficiencies. Those with celiac disease have to be very careful about the foods they buy and eat, so they have to know which grains have gluten and which do not. It's not just grains, though, that they have to be careful of, because gluten-containing grains like wheat are often used as an ingredient in processed foods. So you have to get good at reading your labels if you're going to buy processed foods. Wheat is so common as an ingredient for things like soups, candies, crackers, and beer. So you have to avoid food that has wheat as an ingredient. But it doesn't end there. Not only that, but gluten can get into our food chain in another way, and that is called cross-contamination. This happens when a food is processed in the same facility as a gluten-containing food. More and more companies are aware of gluten issues for those with celiac disease, but they're not required to state where their ingredients were processed. So our nutrition labels aren't everything they could be. Sometimes you will see a label that says this product was made in a facility that also processes wheat. That means that that product is at risk for cross-contamination and may have gluten in it. One gluten-free grain that's at high risk for this kind of cross-contamination is oats. Let me say that again. One gluten-free grain that is at high risk for cross-contamination is oats. Here is a list of safe gluten-free grains. I want to include this to show you that even though you have celiac disease and you're vegan, you can still enjoy some of these wonderful grains. We have quinoa, amaranth, buckwheat. Did those sound familiar? They should. There's also corn, millet, rice, teff. Now, teff is a new grain that we're starting to see in grocery stores, so that's really exciting. Another option. And then sorghum. You may have noticed that I didn't put oats on this list. Oats are technically gluten-free, but because they are at high risk for cross-contamination, they don't make my safe list. However, these grains can provide you with a great nutritional punch if you have celiac disease. As I mentioned earlier, we will separate our discussion into two different camps. We are first going to look at gluten-free grains. My top 3 gluten-free grains for a vegan are, yeah, you guessed it, quinoa, amaranth, and buckwheat. They are all complete plant proteins, meaning they have those 9 essential amino acids, and they are also all gluten-free. Let's start with quinoa. This is how we pronounce it. Some people have different ways they pronounce it. It's all good as long as we know what we're talking about, right? Quinoa has fed people for over 5,000 years. It is actually a seed, but we consider it a pseudo grain because it has so many different uses and functions really as a grain. Quinoa's nutty flavor makes it a great addition to salads, and you should even try it in stuffed peppers. You can really use quinoa as a rice substitute for any dish that you're making. I want you to notice in this picture, do you see the little tails on the grains? These unwind after the quinoa cooks, and it is one distinctive feature of this unique grain. Before we move on, I want to talk about preparing quinoa because it's important. It should be soaked for at least 30 minutes prior to cooking and then thoroughly rinsed. Now, I know the bags say just rinse it, and most people just give it a, nominal 10 seconds, and they shake it around and they think they've rinsed it. And that's not good enough because you need to remove the saponins. Saponins are compounds in the outer coat of the quinoa seed. And they are there because in nature they function to deter birds and other pests from damaging the quinoa as it grows. Saponins are also antifungal and antiviral. That's really important because that means that reduces the need for pesticides and fungicides while we're growing this crop, and that results in a very clean crop of grain. This makes quinoa very easy to grow. And in fact, in 2013, the United Nations realized that quinoa is important for global food security, and they called 2013 the International Year of Quinoa. There is one issue, though, that may prevent you from enjoying this amazing grain, and that is called saponin sensitivity. Some people, like myself, have uncomfortable reactions when they eat quinoa. Even a small amount of the saponins can cause stomach upset and asthma-like symptoms. When I had quinoa, I could literally feel the swelling through all the bronchioles in my lungs. I could probably draw a picture of my lungs. It was not a pleasant feeling, and that was enough for me to say, I don't think I want to eat quinoa again. But fortunately, there are many other nutritious grains to be enjoyed, like amaranth. Amaranth is actually in the same family of grains as quinoa. It's actually a seed and is widely considered a pseudo-grain. This small seed has a nice peppery taste, and historically, amaranth was a staple crop for Aztecs in the 14th century. Now it is a popular choice for gluten-free baking. Our next amazing grain is buckwheat. It would be easy to think that buckwheat is part of the wheat family, but it is not. Unlike wheat, it is gluten-free. Technically, it's a fruit, but like quinoa and amaranth, it's also widely considered a pseudo-grain. Buckwheat has distinctive triangular seeds called groats. Toasting the groats prior to cooking will cut your cooking time in half, but it does take time to get the cooking of buckwheat right. It's often made into this breakfast cereal called kasha. It's very popular in Eastern Europe, and buckwheat can be used to make waffles and soba noodles. Remember, I have a buckwheat recipe for buckwheat waffles, so you should check it out because I think they're pretty yummy. And it's popular to use buckwheat flour when baking with chocolate because the flavor pairs really, really well. So many options for buckwheat. Corn is our next grain. It's easy to think of corn as a vegetable, but it's a grain. Many people grow up eating a lot of corn, making it an American staple. Sometimes corn can get a bad rap for being nutrition poor, but this isn't very accurate. Corn is actually high in carbohydrates, but these carbohydrates bring with them important phytochemicals that help our vision. They bring fiber, B vitamins, and other important minerals. So corn is actually more nutritious than you realize. Corn is also relatively cheap to grow, and it is our largest crop in the US. But unfortunately, 92% of our corn is genetically modified. And most of this corn, a total of 78%, does not even enter our food chain. 48% of it goes to livestock. And the other 30% is used to produce ethanol. Clearly, the versatility of corn cannot be denied. It has many functions outside of our food chain, but within our food supply, it is the main ingredient in these dishes. Polenta, cornbread, corn on the cob, grits. So these are popular dishes throughout the United States. It is also commonly used to produce high fructose corn syrup that appears mostly in soft drinks and chips and prepackaged foods. So from chips to cookies to soda pop, you're going to have this not very good form of corn, and I do not recommend anything that has high fructose corn syrup. Naturally, as a vegan, you may want to move toward other non-GMO foods and stay away from corn. This is a wonderful ideal. Just keep in mind that corn does have deep roots in our culture, and sometimes embracing the set of beliefs means you're going to have to sacrifice some of your traditions. Now, recently I listened to an interview of the singer Carrie Underwood, and she strives to be vegan because she is so impressed with its principles and how healthy it keeps her. And when they asked her, well, what happens when you go to a social event? And she took a very relaxed attitude toward it and said, I'm just happy to be with the people that are there. If there's not something that really fits my diet, life's not perfect, and she might enjoy some cornbread, or maybe something may not be completely vegan, but she knows that most of her efforts go toward being vegan, and life's not perfect. And I thought that was a really good attitude. Now, let's talk about millet. Millet is a grain that hails from ancient Egypt and Greece. Today, millet is a staple food in India, where the flour is used to make the traditional bread called roti. Millet was one of the first grains that I worked with when I started exploring grains. I made a millet burger with it. These were the days when I was trying to force my vegan foods into my old patterns of eating. Instead of just enjoying millet for being millet, I tried to use it to make a burger. But that being said, millet actually does pretty well in that substitute role. Also, you may want to toast the millet first. Many grains are this way, and even nuts. If you toast them in the oven at a low heat for 20-30 minutes, you're going to draw out the nutty flavor of it, and it's going to enhance the flavor of your dish. Rice. Rice is a terrific grain, and it can be used as a base for many, many meals. Like quinoa, it comes in a variety of colors and flavors. White rice will have the lowest amount of nutrition because this is the refined form of rice. It's been stripped of its outer bran coating, so there's not much nutrient or fiber in white rice. Many people prefer to eat brown rice because of its nutritional value. But don't forget, rice also comes as red rice, black rice, wild rice, and rice comes in short grain and long grain forms. So there's a lot to explore when it comes to rice. Rice that hasn't been refined has a much chewier texture than plain white rice. Now, if you're used to eating white rice, here's a tip. When you start eating a whole grain, sometimes those flavors and textures can be a little overwhelming to your taste buds. So instead of doing 100% substitution, break it up. Say 25% of the rice you use can be unrefined, and then 75% can be white rice. I like doing this especially with some wild rice because it's a longer grain black rice, and when you pair it with white rice in that ratio, it gives you a really nice, lovely flavor to any stir fry that you make. And I think it's a great way to start learning how to use other kinds of rice that are not refined. It will bump up the nutritional value of your meal as well. Now, here is another tip. If you are going to make a meal for a non-vegan friend, you invite them over and you're going to make a stir fry, I would recommend making the vegetables and tofu or whatever protein you're going to put in there, and then serve it over jasmine rice. Jasmine rice is a white rice, and when you cook it, it gives this really, really wonderful aroma in your kitchen. So when they walk in your house, it's already going to smell wonderful. And wouldn't they be pleased to sit down to a lovely vegan meal that looks that beautiful? Teff. Teff is one of the smallest grains in the world, so it is rarely refined because that process would destroy most of the kernel. Its small size makes it actually easier to cook, and because it's small, it takes less heat and less fuel than other foods. Teff is a member of the millet family. It has a poppy seed texture. It is a terrific source of natural calcium, which we know is hard to get. And teff doesn't have oxalic acid in it like spinach. If you remember, oxalic acid is present in spinach, and spinach also has calcium, and that prevents the absorption of the calcium in the spinach. Teff doesn't have oxalic acid, so that calcium is more bioavailable. You might have eaten at an Ethiopian restaurant and be familiar with injera. Injera is a fermented form of teff, and they ferment it and make bread out of it. So it gives this bread this spongy texture, and when you eat, you tear off a piece of the bread and you put the food in it and roll it up and eat it. Next, let's talk about sorghum. You may not have heard of this grain. It is used for human consumption in Asia and Africa, but in the US, largely used for feeding livestock and making biofuel. But it is considered the fifth most important cereal crop in the world. It is naturally drought tolerant, which makes it important for food security again, right? It looks like small corn, and it can also be used as a hot breakfast cereal. Hopefully sorghum's popularity will change because sorghum has also a high phytochemical level when compared to other grains and other foods. And these phytochemicals are notable for how they help your body manage glucose and insulin. We have this terrific grain. It's also high in fiber, niacin, magnesium, and manganese. These minerals are really important to have in your diet. And for a growing teenager, you want to optimize the nutrition you're getting from your meals. Sorghum flour is often used in baked goods, which is great if you're looking for another gluten-free option. Oats. Oats are gluten-free, and they are incredibly useful and delicious in many different types of dishes, from granola to breakfast cereal to no-bake cookies, not to mention regular oatmeal. The nutritional value can vary depending on how the oats were processed. Quick oats are the least nutritious because they have been the most processed. That means, they have most of the kernel and the nutrients and the fiber stripped from the outer part of the kernel. If you buy steel cut oats, then you're going to get more of the kernel. It's going to take longer to cook, but it will be more nutritious. Like other grains, oats are packed with nutrition. A half a cup of oats will give you all these nutrients. And 13 grams of protein, 8 grams of fiber, and only 303 calories. And that is amazing for a half a cup of oats. You'll be hard pressed to explain why you as a vegan do not include oats into your meals. Oats are also well known for their heart-friendly benefits. According to multiple researchers, oats may improve blood flow, reduce bad cholesterol, and improve blood sugar levels. The fiber in oats and other whole grains function as a prebiotic. Prebiotic is the media in which the probiotics grow on in your gut. And we know how important those probiotics are in your gut because there's a brain-gut connection, and if you have good probiotics in your gut, they're going to produce serotonin, and that's really good for your brain. So any grain is going to be functioning as a prebiotic, and you just may have seen oats being touted as, oh, this is really good, but that applies to all the grains that we're talking about. And finally, oats can be used as a product for your skin. Bathing in colloidal oatmeal can be very soothing, and in fact, it's sometimes recommended for children who have chickenpox because they're going to want to itch, and if you put them in an oatmeal bath, it's going to help soothe their skin. The next section is going to focus on grains that contain gluten. These are the grains that most of us use because most people are not gluten intolerant, or most people don't have celiac disease. Grains with gluten are terrific for making bread, and bread has often been called the staff of life because it's a staple food in cultures throughout the world. Let's start with wheat. Wheat is the one grain that Americans are most familiar. It is the primary grain grown in this country. In fact, 42 states grow it. There are thousands of varieties of wheat in the world. Durham wheat is one you may have heard of. It's the most common here, and as mentioned earlier, it is refined, and that gives us all-purpose flour. And this flour is used to make pasta, bagels, tortillas, and more. Rye is a cereal grain, and it belongs to a group called edible grasses, Rye grows really well in northern regions and it makes amazing sandwiches. It's also used to make whiskey. The first time I had rye bread, I fell in love. My mom had made these little mini pizzas. She got a mini loaf of rye bread, and they were tiny little squares, and she put pizza toppings on them. It was unique and it was delicious, and I loved the flavor. Then I learned that pumpernickel bread is a combination of rye and wheat flours, and it's another delicious way to enjoy this grain. And like the example I gave you with blending white rice with unrefined rice, pumpernickel bread gives you a really nice flavor, but it doesn't give it too strong as, say, a full rye bread would. Like I mentioned, there are thousands of types of wheat, such as triticale. Now, triticale is a hybrid of wheat and rye. It's probably an early forerunner of our modern wheat. Spelt. This is an ancient grain and a relative of our modern wheat, and it's most commonly used in artisan breads. So, where are you going to find spelt bread? Go find yourself a good bakery, and you're going to see spelt bread. Give it a try. I strongly encourage you to explore different products made with all these different grains. And remember, every great bread deserves a great spread. Keep exploring with all the varieties of wheat that are available in your area. Now, we can't leave out barley. Barley is a grain that reminds me of my mom's kitchen. She made everything from scratch. Even though we were raised with meat and potatoes every single night, Mom was also good with vegetables too. And she made a great vegetable soup that she added barley to. That I'll always remember. Barley added to a soup is so satisfying, and it adds a lot of nutrition. This memorable grain is terrific, one that I look for, and it's especially good on a cold winter day. Barley is rich in minerals, B vitamins, and fiber, and like oatmeal, it's heart healthy. Farina is a form of milled wheat that results in a very fine consistency, which is often used in hot cereal. Now, we aren't really big cereal eaters in the US. We like things quick. In Italy, though, they use this finely ground grain in their pasta. And maybe that's why they're so good at pasta, because they're really picky about the flour that goes into it. And the enriched form of farina is a great source of iron. Many of these grains are sold by this brand, Bob's Red Mill. I've seen this brand everywhere I go. It's wonderful to have a trusted source for these unique grains. Kamut is an ancient wheat that is often overlooked. It's nearly triple the size of a normal wheat kernel. It has a rich nutty flavor, and it can be used not only for bread, but in rice pilaf, casseroles, and salads. And finally, at last, is couscous. This grain has really gotten popular in the last decade. It's a delightful grain, it's round, it cooks really fast, and it's actually made from hulling wheat or barley and forming it into tiny round balls. It cooks fast. It's often sold in boxes that have flavor packets, and you can cook this up in 5 minutes or so. In conclusion, I hope that I've piqued your interest in grains. As a vegan, grains are nutrition powerhouses, and they taste great. Research continues to confirm that some grains like oats are great for heart health and blood pressure, and they are great for blood sugar control. The fiber acts as a prebiotic, which allows the good probiotics to flourish in your gut. Good gut health means good brain health. I have a rice cooker like this one here. It's exactly like this picture. And I use my rice cooker several times a week. It cooks my grain perfectly, no matter what I put into it. And so that means it takes all the guesswork out of it, and you get a nice, really good side dish of grain. I highly recommend that you get one of these. Grains are a fun way to amp up your meals, and there's something for everyone. Thanks for listening, and until next time, this is Rose saying, be kind to yourself.